Welcome back. With more than 6,500 murders since the drug war began in 2008, Juarez has earned the dubious distinction of being the murder capital of North America.
More than 2 decades ago, Medellin, Colombia was one of the most murderous cities in the world, but now it's a much safer city, and officials from Juarez are really hoping to use it as a model for success.
ABC7 reporter Paul Cicala traveled to Medellin and Juarez to bring us this story you'll see only on ABC7.
I had the chance to interview Colombian politicians, members of the military, and citizens affected by Medellin's violent past. And in the first of a 3-part series, I examined the similarities between the drug war that we're experiencing firsthand along our border with what Colombia dealt with more than 20 years ago. Medellin, a city rich in culture, a metropolis of around 3 million people, considered one of the most progressive cities in Latin America.
This city itself, Medellin, is actually one of the safest cities in Colombia.
Medellin has risen up from its well-documented troubled past.
I think that the city is just so vibrant and the people are so happy and so nice.
But more than 20 years ago, it was a different story. The face of the city wasn't the impressive public art, statues, and high-rising buildings you find today, but instead, it was this face, the face of drug lord Pablo Escobar. All through the 1980s and early 90s, Medellin was bombarded by problems strikingly similar to what we're seeing now in El Paso's sister city of Juarez, all created by the demand for illegal drugs. Most of the cocaine that passes through Ciudad Juarez and ultimately goes through El Paso and the rest of the United States is from right here in the country of Colombia. Thousands of people were murdered every year as Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel battled it out with Colombia's Cali cartel, among others. And in our border's case, is the Sinaloa cartel at war with the Juarez cartel. At its worst, Medellin had a murder rate of 250 per 100,000 residents. And in Juarez, some observers estimate more than 200. October was the deadliest month ever here in Ciudad Juarez. More than 350 murders in all. Just imagine, to put that into perspective, that's more than 11 per day.
Pablo Escobar estaba bravo.
Veteran Medellin reporter Luis Alidio Calles describes Escobar as ruthless. He was the last TV reporter to interview Escobar before the drug lord was killed in 1993.
La guerra contra el narcotráfico ha sido dura.
Alidio Calles tells me the war against drug trafficking has been tough and bloody, with a high cost of money and lives.
Sufrimiento.
In Medellin, the killing went beyond those involved in the drug trade. Politicians, military, journalists, outspoken members of the community, countless police officers, innocent civilians, all targets. Remote-controlled car bombs were a common weapon used by Pablo Escobar. Entire blocks would be razed and dozens of innocent people would die. And now Mexico is feeling the effects of narco-terrorism, though on a smaller scale. In July, 4 people were killed in Juarez, including an officer and doctor lured to the scene when a car bomb exploded less than a mile from El Paso's Bowie High School.
First thing we saw in Medellin is that it is very much like the problem we have in Juarez.
Last year, then Juarez Mayor José Reyes Ferriz and other officials from our border visited Medellin in hopes of learning firsthand how the city turned itself around.
Medellin estaba marcada en el mapa con una estrella negra.
Medellin Mayor Alonso Salazar tells me Medellin was marked on the map with a black star. Nobody wanted to visit us. But the situation has changed drastically here in Colombia, and for the better. Now, thousands of tourists make their way to Medellin every single week. After the assassination of Escobar and the systematic cleansing of drug organizations by government and paramilitary groups, Medellin began rebuilding. The strategy? Urban planning focused on social welfare, a crackdown on corruption, and reinforcement of police ranks. It's been touted as the Medellin miracle.
La ciudad pasó del miedo a la esperanza.
Alidio Calles tells me the city's fear transformed to hope.
I am very optimistic that we can do things in Juarez.
Now, life goes on and Medellin doesn't skip a beat. It's still a city with many areas that have yet to be rebuilt, creating opportunities by hammering a positive, progressive perspective into the heads of young and old.
And it is something that we're focusing on in Juarez to try and bring that same success to our city.
taking the border back to the upbeat, booming, bustling Juarez of the past. Coming up tonight on ABC-7 at 10 o'clock, I'll have the second special report of our three-part series. We'll show you how officials in El Paso's sister city are hoping to model social programs in Medellin that focus on giving opportunities to at-risk youth. I'll go in depth with youngsters in Juarez and in Colombia. That's later tonight at 10 o'clock. For ABC-7, I'm Paul Cicala.
Wow, such an interesting piece. I'm looking forward to that because it's so nice to hear about renewing hope for
Yeah,
Juarez,
exactly.
right?
Seeing that there is possibly light at the end of the tunnel.
Wow,
Oh,
let's
great
check in
job,
with
Paul. Good morning, everybody. Time right now here is 5:45. As we first showed you in a special report yesterday, Ciudad Juarez has a number of striking similarities to Medellin at the height of the Colombian cocaine wars more than 20 years ago.
ABC-7 reporter Paul Cicala traveled to Medellin and Juarez and brings us this story you'll see only on ABC-7. It is part 2 of his 3-part series.
Medellin has made a dramatic turnaround. In my recent trip to Colombia, I learned that in addition to a police and military crackdown, the move to stop much of the violence began with the focus on the youth. And now Ciudad Juarez is imitating the Medellin model. Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, one of the most violent cities in the world.
Muertes.
Deaths, an average of 12 of them per day just last month. This area in West Juarez, about a mile from El Paso, Texas, is one of the most dangerous sections of the city. Many of the kids from the area that we had the opportunity to talk to say it's not uncommon for them to see assaults, shootings, and even dead bodies on random streets within the neighborhood. But despite the carnage, life goes on for teenagers like Roberto Ayala. He's seen the narco messages threatening to kill many people, and he's scared. Juarez is considered the murder capital of the Americas, and just over a decade ago, this city, Medellin, had that distinction. But they've implemented a lot of social programs with a concentration on the youth. And Juarez is hoping to follow their footsteps. Last year, more than a dozen officials from Juarez traveled to Medellin. The mayor at the time, José Reyes Ferriz, saw firsthand the Medellin model for success.
Creating opportunities is what they did in Medellin.
Juarez is already investing in libraries, just like Medellin did.
Porque me gusta leer también.
Colombia's transformation included cultural centers in some of the poorest, roughest neighborhoods. And they encouraged youngsters to invest back in their communities. Life is much different now, says Luis Felipe Londoño. Growing up in Colombia, he says he avoided the lure of drugs and crime by joining clubs like the Boy Scouts, because you either unite or you die.
O se matan del todo o se unen.
Medellin, Colombia has been instrumental in keeping kids off the street, not just by encouraging them to get involved socially and through education, but also in sports. That's exactly what they're doing here in Ciudad Juarez as well, including this neighborhood on the east end of Juarez, just south of El Paso. City leaders recently built this state-of-the-art football field in the very neighborhood where 15 people, mostly teens, were massacred in January in what's been called a case of mistaken identity.
Sí, es muy difícil.
Sports offer a necessary distraction for Jesus Sanchez, who says soccer is pointing him in the right direction and away from those he describes as bad people.
Se junta con malas personas.
Another haven for teens, the Casa Juvenil de Juarez, where mentors teach them how to use computers, look for jobs, and expose them to history and culture. Without this place, Omar Garcia tells me he'd be in the streets. Roberto tells me misguided teens can change in places like this, providing tools for youngsters to beat the streets. Medellin, Colombia went from one of the most violent cities in the world, like Juarez of today, to one of the most progressive cities in all of Latin America. And it wasn't just as a result of social programs. Colombia's transformation also began with the revamping of law enforcement and military. And coming up tonight on ABC-7 at 10 o'clock, we'll go in depth on that very topic, taking you from El Paso to Medellin to Juarez and back to El Paso once again. I'm Paul Cicala for ABC7.
All right, so that'll be tonight then.
Absolutely.
Be sure to tune in.
Part 3. And of course, if you missed any of it, we will be posting these stories on our website at KVIA.com.
So insightful, though, all of his pieces. He did a lot of traveling.
He did, and a lot of stories to tell, too. So thanks a lot, Paul. That's good work out there.
Because of a violent drug war, both Colombia and Mexico have dealt with a record number of murders. Medellin in the 80s and 90s, and Juarez today.
ABC7's Paul Cicala traveled to South America and south of the border to examine the similarities between those two countries. He joins us with the third and final part of his in-depth report. Paul?
Medellin went from one of the deadliest cities in the world to one of the most progressive cities in Latin America. The Medellin miracle, as it's been called, began with the revamping of law enforcement and of military. The city's transition from disarray to distinction offers hope for a brighter future in El Paso's sister city of Juarez. Medellin of the 1980s and early 90s. Tens of thousands dead in an all-out war between drug lord Pablo Escobar, the Cali cartel, and the Colombian government. And just south of our border, a war between Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's Sinaloa cartel, the Juarez cartel, and the Mexican government. Also common to both countries,
muerte de gente inocente.
Innocent people killed in the ongoing battle. Now the murder rate in Medellin is decreased by as much as 80%. And Jorge Rosas Dueñas, a colonel in Colombia's army, tells me the city's much safer. Military and civilian authorities have worked to find a path for success. Even though the journey's been difficult, says Medellin Mayor Alonso Salazar. Some of the tactics include the creation of a national police force, spreading officers with drug and bomb-sniffing dogs throughout the city. And as I learned firsthand reporting in Medellin, random checks for weapons in public buildings. Despite the tremendous advances made right here in Colombia with respect to narco-terrorism and curbing a lot of the violence, it is still far from a perfect country. In fact, even one of the days that we were filming this story, a bomb was set off in downtown Bogotá. The target? Journalists.
Una bomba acá, una bomba allá.
Another strategy, the military also being used in Mexico.
That's one of the things we tried to bring to the city of Juarez, especially bringing in about 5,000 troops to work with our police department in Juarez.
Some of those Mexican troops trained personally by Colonel Rosas Dueñas.
De México, entrenándolos aquí en Colombia.
In March of 2009, soldiers arrived to patrol the streets of Juarez, but were replaced by thousands of federal officers about 1 year later. All the while, the local police beefed up its ranks.
In Juarez, we doubled the size of our police department.
Whatever the case, it's still not a perfect world here in Medellin, Colombia. In fact, many of the residents I spoke with say corruption still exists with government officials and law enforcement, but at least it's not as bad as it used to be, and the situation has improved a lot. In an attempt to fight corruption, officials in Medellin increased law enforcement salaries, easing the temptation to take petty bribes. In Mayor Salazar's words,
Hay que purificarlas.
you have to purify the police, something Juarez is also trying to do. Under new rules designed to weed out crooked cops, about 3,200 Mexican federal agents, nearly a tenth of the force, have been fired this year. And officials hope a sense of safety can bring tourists back to Juarez, like it has in Medellin. Here in Medellin, Colombia, it's so safe, thousands of tourists from all parts of the world, including the United States, feel comfortable enough to make their way to cultural events like this one here. We're talking the Feria de los Flores.
I never felt unsafe, not even once.
Alex Vasquez, a U.S. citizen, has spent significant time as a tourist in Medellin and along the Texas-Mexico border.
The difference to here in Mexico, Mexico, I don't think they have enough rules, enough policemen. Over here, you're just overwhelmed by seeing policemen everywhere you look.
This focus on safety, plus social programs and international assistance, are the keys to success, says this longtime Colombian journalist.
Medellin es la prueba de que sí.
Medellin is proof. And that's music to the ears of anybody hoping the drug violence can end and peace can be found in Colombia or Ciudad Juarez. The U.S. government has also played a big role in the transformation of Colombia, from having direct military involvement to providing training and equipment. Also, billions of dollars have gone to fighting the war on drugs through the Plan Colombia. Meanwhile, the U.S. has also committed billions of dollars to Mexico through the Plan Mérida, although most of the money has yet to be awarded. Reporting live, I'm Paul Cicala. Back to you.
Paul, thank you very much. Great job. Well, you can watch Paul's 2 other special reports comparing Juarez and Colombia's drug wars on our website, KVIA.com.
Well, UTEP is gearing up for